I never thought 23 years of climbing the corporate ladder would prepare me for what happened that Tuesday morning in March. My name is Derek Langford, and at 42, I had built what I believed was a solid career as a senior client relations specialist at TechFlow Financial Solutions in Denver, Colorado. 9 years with the company had taught me that relationships were everything in this business, and I had cultivated them like a master gardener tends to prize-winning roses. The morning started like any other. I arrived at our downtown office building at 7:30, grabbed my usual black coffee from the lobby cafe, and settled into my corner cubicle overlooking the Rockies. The view never got old, especially on clear days when the snow-capped peaks seemed close enough to touch. I had earned that view through years of dedication, countless late nights, and a track record that spoke for itself. My computer hummed to life as I reviewed the day's agenda. The crown jewel of my current workload sat prominently in my calendar, finalizing the contract details with Pinnacle Assurance, a massive insurance conglomerate based in Phoenix. This wasn't just any deal. We were talking about a $1.5 million software implementation that would revolutionize their claims processing system. I had spent the better part of 18 months nurturing this relationship, flying back and forth to Phoenix, learning the ins and outs of their business model, and building trust with their executive team. Pinnacle's chief technology officer, Marcus Webb, had become more than just a client. We shared stories about our kids during long business dinners, discussed hiking trails in Colorado during conference calls that ran over, and had developed the kind of professional rapport that makes deals happen. Marcus trusted me implicitly, often saying I was the only person at TechFlow who truly understood their needs. It was the kind of relationship that couldn't be built overnight or transferred to someone else with a simple introduction email. The irony wasn't lost on me that I had just closed a significant deal the month before, bringing in a cool $800,000 from a mid-sized bank in Kansas City. My quarterly numbers were stellar. My client satisfaction scores were through the roof, and I had received nothing but positive feedback in my recent performance review. But I had noticed changes in the air over the past few months, ever since Allison Kerr had taken over as CEO. Allison was the kind of executive who spoke in buzzwords and saw employees as line items on a spreadsheet. She had been brought in by the board to optimize operational efficiency and streamline organizational structure, corporate speak for cutting costs wherever possible. During her first all-hands meeting, she had talked extensively about right-sizing and maximizing shareholder value, phrases that made my stomach turn. I had seen this movie before at previous companies, and it never ended well for the people who actually did the work. The warning signs had been subtle at first. Mandatory training sessions on organizational restructuring appeared on our calendars. The company's generous coffee budget was cut. Parking spaces that had been assigned based on seniority were suddenly under review. Small things, but I had been in corporate America long enough to read the tea leaves. Still, I felt relatively secure. My numbers were solid, my clients were happy, and I was in the middle of the biggest deal of my career. That security evaporated at exactly 10:15 that Tuesday morning when I received an Outlook calendar invitation that would change everything. The subject line was innocuous enough. Urgent meeting, Derek Langford. The timing was immediate, and the location was Conference Room B, a windowless box on the 5th floor that was typically used for disciplinary actions and exit interviews. My stomach dropped, but I told myself it could be anything. Maybe they wanted to discuss the Pinnacle deal, or perhaps there was an issue with one of my other clients that needed immediate attention. I gathered my laptop and notepad, straightened my tie, and took the elevator up one floor. The hallway seemed longer than usual as I walked toward Conference Room B, my footsteps echoing off the polished concrete floors. I knocked twice and entered to find Allison Kerr seated at the far end of the rectangular table, her expression unreadable behind wire-rimmed glasses. To her right sat Janet Morrison from Legal, a woman I had only met in passing, but whose presence immediately told me this wasn't going to be a routine meeting. "Derek, please have a seat," Allison said, gesturing to the chair directly across from her. Her tone was neutral, professional, and completely devoid of warmth. I sat down, placing my laptop on the table and trying to read the room. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before Allison opened a manila folder and began speaking. Derek, I'll get straight to the point. As part of our ongoing organizational restructuring, we've made the difficult decision to eliminate your position effective immediately. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my face flush hot, then cold, as I tried to process what I was hearing. This decision is purely economic and reflects our need to streamline operations and reduce overhead costs. Your termination is not performance-related. I sat there in stunned silence for a moment, my mind racing. 9 years of loyalty, dedication, and results. And this was how it ended? In a sterile conference room with a CEO who had been with the company for less than 6 months? I wanted to argue, to point out the pinnacle deal that was days away from closing, to remind her of my track record and the relationships I had built. Instead, I found myself asking the only question that seemed to matter. What about my clients? What about Pinnacle? My voice was steady, but I could feel the tremor of disbelief underneath. Janet Morrison leaned forward, consulting her own folder. All client relationships will be transitioned to other team members. We have protocols in place for these situations. The casualness with which she dismissed years of relationship building was breathtaking. These weren't just accounts to be transferred like files in a cabinet. They were human connections built on trust, understanding, and countless hours of personal investment. Transitioned to whom? I pressed. Marcus Webb at Pinnacle specifically requested to work with me. He's never even met anyone else on our team. Allison's expression remained impassive. That will be handled internally. Right now. I need you to gather your personal belongings and return all company property. Your access to email and systems has already been disabled for security purposes. Security purposes. As if I were some kind of corporate spy rather than a dedicated employee who had given the best years of his career to this company. The next 30 minutes were a blur of humiliation and bureaucratic procedure. I was escorted to my desk by a security guard, a 19-year-old kid named Tommy who apologized quietly as we walked. I packed my few personal items into a cardboard box, a photo of my daughter at her college graduation, a small, succulent plant that had somehow survived 9 years of office lighting, and a Denver Broncos coffee mug that had been a gift from a satisfied client years ago. Everything else, my business cards, my client files, my carefully maintained contact lists, belonged to the company. As I cleaned out my desk drawers, I could feel the eyes of my colleagues on me. Some looked away awkwardly when I caught their gaze, while others offered sympathetic smiles and mouthed words of support. My phone buzzed constantly with text messages from coworkers who had already heard the news through the office grapevine. Can't believe they let you go. This place is falling apart. Call me later. Each message was a reminder of the professional relationships I was leaving behind, connections that had taken years to build and would be severed in a single morning. The elevator ride down to the lobby felt like a descent into purgatory. Tommy, the security guard, made awkward small talk about the weather, clearly uncomfortable with his role as my escort. In the lobby, he extended his hand for a handshake, another quiet apology in his eyes. I shook it, thanked him for treating me with dignity, and walked out into the Denver sunshine carrying everything that remained of my 9-year career in a single cardboard box. I sat in my car in the parking garage for a long time, staring at the concrete walls and trying to process what had just happened. My phone continued to buzz with messages and missed calls, but I wasn't ready to talk to anyone yet. The rational part of my brain was already calculating severance packages and updating my resume, but the emotional part was still reeling from the shock of it all. How do you compress 9 years of professional identity into a 30-minute termination meeting? The drive home was a haze of familiar streets and racing thoughts. I had been through layoffs before, earlier in my career, but this felt different. This felt personal, even though Allison had insisted it wasn't. The timing was particularly cruel, just weeks away from closing the biggest deal I had ever worked on, a deal that would have secured my position for years to come, or so I had thought. My house in Stapleton was quiet when I arrived, the kind of mid-morning silence that reminded me that normal people were at work while I was suddenly, inexplicably, unemployed. I set the cardboard box on my kitchen counter and stared at it for a moment before opening a beer, even though it wasn't yet noon. Some situations call for breaking the rules. Over the next few days, I followed all the conventional wisdom for the newly unemployed. I updated my LinkedIn profile, reached out to my professional network, and began the soul-crushing process of job hunting. But I also did something else. I stayed completely silent about what had happened at TechFlow. No angry social media posts, no bitter emails to former colleagues, no attempts to badmouth Allison Kerr or the company's new direction. I simply disappeared from their world as quietly as they had ejected me from it. This silence turned out to be more powerful than I had anticipated. Within a week, my phone started ringing with calls from confused clients who couldn't reach me through the normal channels. My personal cell phone number had been shared with key clients over the years for urgent situations, and they had no idea that their primary contact at TechFlow had been eliminated. The first call came from Marcus Webb at Pinnacle Assurance. His voice carried a note of concern that immediately grabbed my attention. "Derek, I've been trying to reach you through the main office, but I keep getting transferred to different people who don't seem to know anything about our project. Is everything okay?" I paused before answering, choosing my words carefully. "I'm no longer with TechFlow. Marcus, as of this week, actually." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Marcus spoke, and I could hear the surprise in his voice. "You're not with them anymore, but we're supposed to finalize everything next week. You're the only person there who understands our requirements." "I understand that, and I'm sorry for any inconvenience this causes. The company will assign someone else to handle your account." Even as I said the words, I knew how inadequate they sounded. You can't just assign someone to replace 18 months of relationship building and technical understanding. "Derek, can I be frank with you? You're the reason we chose TechFlow in the first place. We've had 3 other companies pitch us over the past 2 years, but you were the only one who really got what we needed. If you're not there anymore..." He trailed off, but the implication was clear. I knew I was standing at a crossroads. I could take the high road, wish him well, and encourage him to work with whoever TechFlow assigned to replace me. It would be the professional thing to do, the ethical thing to do, or I could plant a seed that might grow into something more interesting. "Marcus, I appreciate that more than you know. If TechFlow can't provide the level of service you need, and if you're looking for alternatives, I might be able to suggest someone who could help." I kept my voice neutral, factual. I wasn't bad-mouthing my former employer or actively trying to steal their client. I was simply responding to a direct question about alternatives. "I'm listening," Marcus said, and I could practically hear him leaning forward in his chair. "There's a smaller company here in Denver called Alpine Tech Solutions. They're not as big as TechFlow, but they specialize exactly in what you need. And they have a much more personalized approach to client service. I've been consulting with them recently, and I think they might be a good fit for what Pinnacle is trying to accomplish." This wasn't entirely true yet, but it wasn't entirely false either. I had indeed been having conversations with Alpine Tech Solutions, a scrappy startup founded by 2 former colleagues who had left TechFlow the previous year under similar circumstances. They had reached out to me the day after my termination, having heard through the industry grapevine what had happened. Their offer to bring me on as a consultant had been sitting in my email inbox, waiting for me to decide whether I was ready to make such a dramatic pivot. "Can you put me in touch with them?" Marcus asked. "Of course. Let me make some calls and have someone reach out to you directly. Just to be clear, though, this would mean starting over with a new vendor. I know that's not ideal given your timeline." "Derek, let me worry about the timeline. What I can't afford is to work with a company that doesn't value the people who understand my business. If they let you go, I have to question their judgment on a lot of other things too." That conversation lasted another 20 minutes, and by the end of it, I had agreed to facilitate an introduction between Pinnacle and Alpine Tech. I hung up the phone feeling something I hadn't experienced since walking out of TechFlow's offices, a sense of purpose and forward momentum. The call to Tom Chen, one of Alpine's co-founders, was even more interesting. Tom had been a senior developer at TechFlow before leaving to start his own company, and he had no love lost for the way the company was being run under Allison's leadership. "Derek, I can't say I'm surprised they let you go, but I can say it's the stupidest thing they've done yet," Tom said when I explained the situation. "You were one of the few people there who actually understood both the technical side and the client side. That's not a skill set you can just replace. Well, their loss might be your gain." I replied. "I just got off the phone with Marcus Webb at Pinnacle Assurance. They're not happy with how TechFlow is handling the transition, and they're open to hearing about alternatives." Tom's excitement was palpable, even through the phone. "Pinnacle Assurance? That's the $1.5 million deal you were working on, right? Derek, if we could land that, it would be transformational for us. But can we actually deliver what they need?" "Better than TechFlow can, especially now. You have the technical chops, and with me consulting on the client relationship side, we can give them exactly what they're looking for. Plus, they'll get the personalized attention that a company our size can provide." Over the next 2 weeks, I watched my quiet act of professional rebellion unfold in ways I hadn't anticipated. Marcus Webb and his team at Pinnacle came to Denver to meet with Alpine Tech Solutions, and I served as the liaison who made it all possible. The meetings went better than anyone had dared to hope. Alpine's technical team, led by Tom and his co-founder Sarah Martinez, demonstrated a deep understanding of Pinnacle's needs that impressed even their most skeptical executives. More importantly, Pinnacle's leadership team was struck by the difference in company culture. Where TechFlow had become increasingly corporate and impersonal under Allison's leadership, Alpine maintained the kind of entrepreneurial energy and client focus that had attracted Pinnacle to TechFlow in the first place. During one particularly productive session, Marcus pulled me aside and said something that crystallized why my quiet approach was working so well. "Derek, I have to tell you, the contrast is striking. 3 weeks ago, TechFlow was treating us like we should be grateful for their attention. These Alpine folks are treating us like partners. That's the difference between a company that's focused on cost cutting and one that's focused on value creation." The final nail in TechFlow's coffin came during what should have been their opportunity to salvage the relationship. Allison had personally intervened when she realized that Pinnacle was wavering, assigning her best remaining account manager, a sharp woman named Lisa Park, to take over the relationship. Lisa was competent and professional, but she faced an impossible task. She was trying to rebuild in days what I had spent 18 months constructing. The meeting took place in Pinnacle's Phoenix offices, and I heard about it secondhand from Marcus, who called me afterward with a mixture of frustration and amusement in his voice. "Derek, I almost felt sorry for Lisa," he said. "She was clearly trying her best, but she couldn't answer basic questions about our implementation timeline. She didn't know about the custom reporting requirements we discussed 6 months ago, and she had no idea why we needed the specific database architecture we had agreed on. It was like watching someone try to perform surgery with a roadmap." The contrast with Alpine's presentation the following week couldn't have been starker, because I had been intimately involved in every aspect of Pinnacle's requirements. I was able to brief Alpine's team on everything from technical specifications to the personal preferences of individual decision makers. They walked into that meeting more prepared than TechFlow had been after 18 months of relationship building, 6 weeks after my termination. Pinnacle Assurance officially terminated their contract negotiations with TechFlow and signed a $1.5 million implementation agreement with Alpine Tech Solutions. The news hit TechFlow's offices like a bomb, and I heard about the aftermath through a network of former colleagues who kept me informed about the chaos that ensued. Allison's response was predictably corporate and tone-deaf. She called an emergency all-hands meeting to address what she termed competitive challenges and announced a new initiative to strengthen client retention protocols. The irony of implementing client retention strategies after firing the person most responsible for client relationships wasn't lost on the employees who sat through her presentation. The legal department, led by Janet Morrison, launched an investigation into whether I had violated my non-compete agreement or misappropriated proprietary information. They combed through my personal emails and phone records, looking for evidence of corporate espionage or contract interference. What they found instead was a single phone conversation with a concerned client who had asked for alternatives, and a recommendation based on that client's stated needs. There was nothing illegal, nothing unethical, and nothing that violated any agreement I had signed. The damage to TechFlow's reputation extended far beyond the loss of a single contract. Word traveled quickly through the tight-knit world of financial services technology that TechFlow had lost its biggest client of the year due to personnel decisions that prioritized cost-cutting over client relationships. Other clients began asking pointed questions about account stability and whether their projects might be similarly disrupted by future right-sizing initiatives. Within 3 months of my departure, TechFlow had lost 2 additional clients, not because they were actively poached, but because the companies had lost confidence in TechFlow's ability to maintain consistent service levels. The cost savings from eliminating my position, perhaps $60,000 in annual salary, had resulted in a revenue loss of over $2 million when all the departing clients were tallied. Meanwhile, my own situation was improving dramatically. Alpine Tech Solutions had initially brought me on as a consultant to help with the Pinnacle implementation, but as the project progressed and other opportunities emerged, Tom and Sarah offered me a full partnership in the company, not just a job, but an actual ownership stake in a growing business. Derek, we've learned something important from working with you on this project, Sarah explained during a lunch meeting at a small cafe near their offices. The technical side of what we do is important, but it's not the differentiator. What sets companies apart in this industry is the ability to build and maintain relationships with clients. You have that skill in spades, and we'd be idiots not to make you a full partner. The partnership agreement gave me a 3% equity stake in Alpine Tech Solutions, along with the title of Vice President of Client Relations. It wasn't just a job, it was an opportunity to build something from the ground up, something that valued the very skills that TechFlow had discarded. Over the following months, I threw myself into helping Alpine grow. The Pinnacle contract provided a solid foundation, but we didn't stop there. I leveraged my industry relationships to bring in additional clients, including 2 companies that had been considering TechFlow but were put off by stories of their recent instability. By the end of the year, Alpine had grown from a 6-person startup to a 15-person company with over $4 million in annual recurring revenue. The vindication I felt was immense, but it wasn't complete until a conference in Chicago the following spring provided an unexpected coda to the entire experience. The National Financial Technology Conference was an annual gathering of industry professionals, and I had attended every year for the past decade, first as a TechFlow representative and now as a partner at Alpine Tech Solutions. I was networking at the welcome reception, discussing a potential new client relationship with a group of insurance executives when I noticed a familiar figure across the crowded room. Allison Kerr stood near the registration table, looking somewhat less confident than she had during our last meeting. The intervening months had clearly been challenging for her. TechFlow's struggles had been well documented in industry publications, and there were persistent rumors that the board was growing impatient with her leadership. Our eyes met across the room, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then, to my surprise, she began walking toward me. The insurance executives I had been talking with noticed my distraction and followed my gaze. "Derek, isn't that the CEO from TechFlow?" asked Janet Phillips from Cornerstone Insurance. "The company that lost the Pinnacle deal to you guys?" "It is indeed," I replied, watching Allison's approach with interest. She stopped a few feet away, extending her hand with a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Derek, it's good to see you again. I heard about your success with Alpine. Congratulations." I shook her hand, maintaining eye contact. "Thank you, Allison. How are things at TechFlow?" "Challenging, but we're adapting. That's the nature of business, isn't it? Constant evolution." Her response was pure corporate speak, the kind of non-answer that said everything while revealing nothing. The group of insurance executives had grown quiet, sensing the undercurrent of tension in our exchange. They knew the story, everyone in the industry knew the story, and they were watching to see how it would play out in person. "I'm sure you are adapting," I said, allowing a slight smile to play across my lips. "Though I imagine it's been a learning experience, there's always a difference between cost-cutting and value creation, isn't there?" Allison's smile became more strained. "Well, I should let you get back to your networking. It was good to see you. Derek," as she turned to walk away, I called after her just loud enough for the group around us to hear clearly. "Allison, one more thing." She stopped and turned back, and I could see the wariness in her eyes. "I've always believed that people are a company's most valuable asset, not its biggest expense. It's unfortunate that you didn't see it that way, but I'm grateful for the opportunity it created. The silence that followed was profound. Allison managed a tight nod before walking away, and I turned back to find the insurance executives looking at me with expressions ranging from admiration to barely concealed amusement. "Well," said Janet Phillips, raising her wine glass in a mock toast, "I think we can safely say that went well." The laughter that followed felt like the final chapter in a story that had begun with humiliation and ended with something approaching triumph. Not the petty, vindictive kind of triumph that comes from actively seeking revenge, but the deeper satisfaction that comes from proving that your principles and your value were real even when others couldn't see them. 6 months later, Alpine Tech Solutions received a buyout offer from a larger firm that valued us at $42 million. My 3% stake, acquired for the simple act of maintaining my professional integrity and helping a client find what they needed, was suddenly worth over $1 million. Tom and Sarah decided to accept the offer, but they structured the deal to allow the existing team to remain in leadership roles within the larger organization. As I signed the paperwork that would make me financially secure for the rest of my life, I thought about that Tuesday morning when I had walked out of TechFlow carrying my belongings in a cardboard box. At the time, it had felt like the end of something important. Now I understood that it had actually been the beginning. The revenge I had taken on TechFlow wasn't the loud, dramatic kind that makes for good television. It was quiet, professional, and ultimately more devastating than any public tantrum could have been. I had simply continued to do what I had always done: prioritize relationships, understand client needs, and deliver value. The difference was that I was now doing it for people who appreciated those qualities rather than seeing them as disposable overhead. In the end, the best revenge wasn't getting even. It was getting ahead. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do when someone shows you who they really are is to simply be exactly who you've always been. The market has a way of rewarding that kind of consistency, even when individual companies don't